So right now we find ourselves in a season that is really unlike anything I've ever been through, nor have anybody I know. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about in our conversations, whether it's online, on social media, or just the people in the news, what I hear a lot is conversations about things like self-isolation and things like restrictions of freedom or freedom in general. Last week in the devotional, I challenged you guys to consider that what catches our eye, we're going to drift towards, and to be intentional about where we move. So today, I'm just going to talk about isolation and freedom in a way that I hope gives you guys a little impetus to consider it differently, to be intentional in this very unique time. So I hope you enjoy this. In June 1935, a failed stockbroker and reformed drunk, Bill Wilson, founded Alcoholics Anonymous after, in his own words, meeting God in a hospital bed. With this structure inspired by the Bible, he put his method into 12 steps. Today, this 200-word set of steps written by a one-time broken-down drunk with absolutely no training other than the invaluable experience of having actually lived it, well, it's become the cornerstone of all addiction treatment in America. So much so that anyone seeking freedom from some drug and alcohol issue will encounter some aspect of these 12 steps on their road to recovery. But do you know what the truly amazing thing is about this program? That the professionals who study it, they really cannot identify why it really works. But they've begun to theorize that the transformation that so many people stuck in this deadly cycle of addiction of sins, well, this transformation which so many people experience, it begins with one of the most powerful moments which occurs at every AA meeting, in a variety of basements at the over 55,000 meetings today across America. Well, it occurs when someone steps up and introduces themselves saying, "My name is Don, and I'm an alcoholic." This transformation gains momentum in that moment when a person, they just tear down these walls, they become transparent, they become vulnerable. This transformation, as it turns out, always begins with confession. But I want you guys to understand that Alcoholics Anonymous did not invent this. They didn't invent the practice of confession. It wasn't invented by Bill Wilson. In the early church, one of the most striking characteristics of people who were placing their lives in Jesus was this open confession of their struggles, of their problems. One of the things I've been encouraging anyone who is wanting to be active in the formation of Life Point here in Sweet Home, I've asked them all to be reading the book of Acts. And what you'll discover as you read the book of Acts, you'll discover people who are no longer wishing to hide behind some narrative, hide behind this idea that, well, I'm okay. It's not my fault, it's their fault. People who don't want to say anymore, well, if they hadn't, then I wouldn't have, or if you'd only, if my wife would, or my husband didn't. What you find in the early church are people who no longer desired to hide behind their excuses because the cost of their concealment had become too great. And the freedom that they found that was offered by confession was just too appealing. I've often said that we just love stories, that in essence, if you strip everything else down about how we communicate, we are storytellers. It's how we communicate with each other, and it's actually how we communicate with ourselves. And we love stories. They're so appealing because what a story does is it provides a complete and consistent explanation of events. And the most appealing stories, well, they always possess no confusion and no ambiguity. They're the best story. They're just clear. And this is why the stories we tell ourselves are so powerful. This is true for the stories we tell ourselves. We want them to be clear with no ambiguity. The stories we tell ourselves are powerful because they create our identity. They create within all of us this narrative of who we think we are, which would be great except for one very important thing, which is often the stories we tell ourselves, well, they're wrong. And almost always, if they're not entirely wrong, they're incomplete at best. And regardless of any new information or facts that are introduced, any new introduction of facts that create confusion or ambiguity, causing us to question the narrative, regardless of anything we hear, our default as human beings is to choose the story that makes us feel the best, to protect our identity we've created through the stories that we've told ourselves. We choose the story that fits most easily into my narrative. And what's my narrative? My narrative is the exact same as every one of yours. My narrative is that I'm a good person at heart, that I only have the best of intentions, which means that if something goes wrong or there's a disagreement, that it's not my fault, it's your fault, it's their fault. But the truth is, all of our efforts to paint ourselves in the best light, to fiercely protect and maintain this narrative about how we feel about ourselves, that we're the victim, that it's their fault, well, all of these are simply attempts to hide. And that's actually been the problem since the very beginning. You see, the very first story of the Bible is the creation account, and it tells us that God created our first parents. And he told them some things they should do, and he told them one thing they should not do. And you can read the story on your own, but I'll highlight some of it. As soon as he had given them this freedom, they set about doing exactly what he told them not to do, and there was a consequence for that. So they used to walk together in the garden. God would come down and he would commune with them, and they would walk in the early morning in the garden, but then one day God shows up and they're not there. So here's what he asked. He said, "Why are you hiding? Where are you?" Verse 9, Genesis 3. "Where are you?" And Adam, he said, "I heard the sound of thee in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I command you not to eat?" And the man said, "The woman that you gave to be with me, she gave it from the tree, and I ate." And this is an amazing story. It's amazing because what Adam's response does is it reveals some paralyzing issues, which you and I still contend with today, that we struggle with, every one of us, even today. And the first of these issues that's revealed in Adam's response is we have this fear of being truly seen, that we have this almost paralyzing, compulsive need to not be truly known because we're afraid that all of our failings, all of our insecurities will be seen. And our fear is, if we're truly seen, then won't we be judged? And so what do? Again, we push this narrative, this story that I'm okay, that you're okay. We push this narrative that I don't struggle with things you might struggle with. I certainly don't struggle with insecurities. I don't struggle with anger. I don't struggle with lust or addiction. You and I, we don't want to admit that the truth is we're scared. The truth is we don't want to admit that sometimes we don't, tell the truth. We don't want people to know that my life is a mess because of my undisciplined nature. We don't want people to know that I'm afraid. Basically, we just don't want people to know that we're broken. In fact, we are so eager to avoid this hard look at our own culpability and our story that we tell ourselves, meaning our own responsibility for the damage that our choices have wrought in the lives of people all around us that we care for. We are so eager as a society that our society actually protects us. It protects us by providing any myriad of labels to describe our brokenness without us ascribing any accountability to our choices. Now, I want to be clear so I'm not misunderstood today. Please do not misunderstand me. There are certainly issues from our upbringing. There are certainly genetic predispositions that we all have, which lead to issues in our life. I understand that. But at some level, I made a choice. At some level, you make a choice. And what's important to understand is that choice reflected the state of your heart. But that's a reflection that we do not want to see. Which brings us to the second thing we discovered within Adam's response to God's question of, why are you hiding? Where are you? Did you notice that he left out one small detail? It's just a small thing. Adam actually left out, well, what he actually did. He actually left out what his role in this was. He just couldn't bring himself to own up to what he had actually done, which was what? Well, he had made a decision to disobey God. And so he did what we often do. He did what I so often do. He avoided his accountability by clouding the truth, by speaking in half-truths and vague generalities. But what he didn't do, he didn't actually confess. Instead, he hid. And in the act of hiding his behavior, he did something that all of us choose to do when we hide from our accountability, but we don't even know we're doing it. He chose not just to hide, he chose to move even further away from God, away from what his heart actually truly desired. And we all continue to do the very same thing. You see, we put up these walls. We put up these walls to control the narrative, to protect our hearts, because our fear is if people only knew what was inside us, well, they probably wouldn't like us. But these walls, built to protect our hearts, and this is the point I need you to get today. These walls, built to protect our hearts, are the very things which prevent people from reaching them, and it keeps us isolated. And so the more we hide, the more we try to maintain the narrative that we're all good, the more we try to push down our fears and let no one in, the more isolated we become, and the further from freedom we move. Because you will never find freedom in isolation. Or is that true? Is that actually true? Maybe it's been true my whole life, except perhaps during this season that we find ourselves in, this season of self-isolation. And so let's just take a look at where I have found myself in recently and where I have also discovered other people to be. You find yourself in this season you are currently in, where all of the amusements that you typically pursue are no longer available. Myself would be, I've discovered that I have a routine. I get up in the morning, Michelle has made us coffee. Well, it's in the pot. I have to make my own coffee. But then I retreat to my couch and I turn on ESPN. And through the main part of the day, if I'm at home, there's ESPN just babbling in the background, talking heads debating sports. All of those amusements. At night, I would come home and watch a Blazer game. I'd find another sporting thing to watch. I love sports. They're no longer available to me. And I would assume you find yourself in the same place where the amusements that you typically pursued are no longer available. The wide expanse of your travels, the freedom to go wherever you want to go, regardless of who's there, how many people are there, go to church, go to the supermarket, go to the movie, go to the gym. These things, this wide expanse of your typical travel, have now been reduced greatly to your home, with your family. As I've said earlier, I'm from the South, and my mother's parents had this huge, beautiful old home. And I can remember being a child, and what I loved to do was hang out on the porch. And I would go down this back dark room, Transcoms, and then like a dog trot they had, that's kind of a southern term, and there would be books, and I would pick books, and I remember sitting there to read a book, and I could hear the house settling. And I don't know if you've ever been in an old house when it starts to creak and it starts to groan, but it's actually, if you're a 9 to 12-year-old boy, it's a little terrifying. And it was. I discovered that sometimes the house settling, the sounds of an old house settling could be very disturbing. But you know what I've also discovered? I've discovered that the sounds of an unsettled soul are much more painful to hear than those of a settling house. So in this quiet time that's been forced upon you and forced upon me, what sounds are you hearing? What sounds are you hearing when the patterns of your day have been altered in such a way that you're forced to listen? What are you learning about the relationships you have with those people that you've been forced to isolate with? What are you learning? Are you learning that the walls that you built up to protect your heart, the walls that you built up over a lifetime to protect your heart, are now keeping you from engaging intimately with the people that you love the most? Are you discovering that your mind is always racing with the thoughts that you wish would just shut up, that you used to just push away by, like me, turning on ESPN, pretending everything was fine, not dealing with some of the fears and insecurities I have, or just letting other people drown out the noise? Are you discovering that in this time of self-isolation, you just have no longer a place to hide? Amusement is a strange word, and I've said this before in my teachings, that actually to muse means to ponder, to consider, to deeply think about. So when we say amuse, if we had an A before any word, it says the lack of. So an amusement is something that we pursue that would allow us freedom from actually considering, from pondering, from deeply thinking about. And so what I would say, amusements have always given us the absence of thought, but perhaps now the sounds of your unsettled soul are just beginning to creak, and hearing them has become disturbing to you. Because now you have to actually look. You're forced to consider who you truly are. But I can tell you from personal experience that it is quite painful when the narrative of who you tell yourself you are falls apart. It's not fun to see yourself for who you truly are. I mean, we are quick. One of the ways I've discovered in my past life before I've realized the newness in Christ that I've only truly embraced for the past probably 10 or 15 years. That's what I mean. I've discovered in this new life in Christ that the old me would avoid self-introspection, self-thought, deeply pondering my reasons. I would avoid that by being quick to criticize and judge others. In fact, many of us are the same way, right? We have a list of other people's flaws that we can refer to in a heartbeat. There's a quiet pause in a conversation that might lead us to consider our own role, but man, we bring out everyone else's. And I want to give you guys the grace to understand today that some of you may even be true. Some of these things that we talk about, people's flaws, the reasons for my pain, some of them may indeed be true and accurate. Life is hard and we hurt each other. So you have indeed been hurt. Your parents may have actually been pretty poor parents. Maybe your teacher, maybe your boss, maybe your coach, maybe they really did have it in for you. And so if you think your anger, if you consider that your bitterness towards all of these people is justifiable, maybe it is. But if you're looking for freedom from some emotion or behavior which has grabbed you, which has enslaved you, and it's become evident perhaps during this season as your spouse or your children are just driving you crazy, or the people at a supermarket fighting over things are just driving you into anger, if you're looking for freedom from those emotions or behaviors, focusing on other people's behaviors, well, it's actually only going to blur where you actually need to look, which is at yourself. I share a bathroom with 2 other men in my family at my house. And sometimes it's not as clean as my wife would like. In fact, when anybody shows up and they have to use the restroom, she always says to them, well, I don't know how clean it is. You may want to use the hall bathroom. It's not that bad. But one thing I have noticed is sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth, I've noticed that on the mirror, there are little specks from actually previous times that I brushed my teeth. And so I try to tell my wife, I actually shouldn't be given a demerit for not cleaning up. I should be given praise that I regularly practice good oral hygiene. But apparently, it's not the way she looks at it. But I will give her credit because she's right. Sometimes when I'm looking in that mirror at the speckles, I think to myself, someone should clean this. But what a fool I would be if I were to, in the middle of looking at my reflection when I get up in the morning and all the work that needs to be done, what a fool I would be if I were to focus on those spots and ignore the work which my reflection demanded. But isn't that what we do? Like the little spots on my mirror, they're real. They are there. There's no denying that they are there. Someone would be a fool to tell me there's no spots. Like those little spots on my mirror, there may indeed be real wrongs which you have suffered. And you may be tempted to focus on those, but if you will, You'll be like the man described in James 1, James 1, verses 22 through 25. But prove yourself doers of the word and not merely hearers who delude themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he is. And why do we do that? Why do we have instances and moments where we can see ourselves for who we really are, but just like a man who looks at that for a second and walks away and doesn't remember? We do that because we just don't want to admit what we really are. But the truth is, if you don't work on what your reflection reveals, you're only fooling yourself. You see, if you don't work on what your reflection reveals that day in the mirror, you're only fooling yourself. Everybody else in your life can see that your hair is a mess. Everybody else can see there's food in your teeth, and you get that goop in your eyes. You're not fooling anybody except yourself. Do you know what the word confess actually means? To confess simply means to agree. So who are you agreeing with in this idea? Who are you agreeing with? Well, as it turns out, God already knows. You're simply agreeing. Your family already knows. The people who work with you, they already know. You're simply agreeing with them. So when you confess, all you're really doing is you're staring intently at the mirror, you're ignoring the speckles of all that's been done to you, and you're agreeing with everybody else, including God, that that's actually what you look like. And God already knows. And for those of you who know how much He loves you, that should be a sense of great contentment, of great peace, of great rest. But the truth of it is, that is not true for so many people. In fact, I would say for most people. The fact that God knows who you are can be, in fact, quite terrifying, because many of us have been taught that God is critical and God is judgmental. But nothing is further from the truth. You see, God, when He created our first parents, He gave us and Him this greatest gift of all, which is relationship. We were designed for relationship. He desires to be in a relationship with us. We're the ones hiding behind walls of our own creation. We're the ones choosing to hide in the dark. God is calling us out of the darkness and into the light, to actually be seen truly as I really am, broken in all my flaws, all of my brokenness. And the question He would be asking you is the same question He's asked me many times, which is, why are you hiding? Why are you hiding? But we have a great opportunity here, wrapped up in this time of isolation when all of our amusements and all of our distractions, well, they're gone, and we have to focus on the sounds of our own behaviors and our own emotions. We try to push them down. The question that God is asking is, why are you hiding? And it's a question I challenge you to answer honestly, because so many of you out there, in fact, all of us, we want to be healed from these things that have been a burden to us, that bring us pain. We want to be healed, but you need to understand this. God will not heal what you will not acknowledge. And the direction that you head when God approaches, just like with our first parents in the garden, the direction you head when God approaches during this season of isolation we find ourselves in, well, the direction you go reveals your thoughts about Him. Is He critical? Is He judgmental? Is He loving? Close to a year ago, I had a vivid dream, and I was standing in front of a chalkboard, and written on the chalkboard was this complete sentence: God delights in opportunities to display His love for us. And they come sometimes in strange seasons and strange ways, but I can tell you that in this unique season none of us have went through, where the unknown is out there, God delights in opportunities to display His love for us. In these moments when the question is, why are you hiding? And you want to suppress that, it is an opportunity for God to display his love for you if you acknowledge your hurt, your pain. And when you come to believe that, you will be quicker to listen to his voice as he reveals the reasons for your hiding, as he reveals the reasons for your anxious thoughts. You'll be quicker when you understand that the one who knows us best, as I was taught as a child, loves us the most. And amongst his people, with this knowledge that he loves us, that he loves me, that he loves you, you will be quicker to say, I'm sorry. To who? Maybe to your family. Maybe to your family where the irritation and the bitterness is just coming up. You'll be quicker to display and confess your insecurities to your spouse, your fears to the people closest to you. This is a strange season, but I firmly hold on to a promise that I mentioned in a devotional earlier. Romans 8:28, that God uses all things for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And I say that even knowing how in the world could he ever use this season where our freedoms seem to be restricted and self-isolation is the norm of the day. And here's what I believe now. I believe that for many of us, many of you, one day on the other side of this, you could point back when people ask you about this season of life. You can point back to this being the season where you were freed from distractions. You were freed from amusements. And this was actually the season where you found freedom in isolation. So in the interest of just giving information out to people who have been asking me what we're doing, kind of how we're proceeding, at the present time, we're going to continue to put out content like this, and we're going to be even leaning more into this time when you guys are going to be, like all of us, like myself included, isolated and indoors and can't go to church. We're really going to focus hard on giving you guys content, whether it's our devotionals or every week. Now there's going to be a sermon, other things in the course of a week. We're going to continue to do that. One of the things that people have asked me is how can they support? Well, there's a couple ways. One is obviously sometimes we're so busy doing, we simply forget to pray. If you guys could please pray for LifePoint and God's direction, how we want to go, how he wants us to go actually. We crave that prayer. We need that. The other thing would be if this is something that you guys are interested, if this is a passion you have to help us spread this with our vision we have to reach people with God's word. And if you want to be a part of it, absolutely. We also need financial support. We're working a couple different ways to do that. Soon we will have the option of online giving through a website that's being created currently. But right now what we have is a P.O. Box. So if you want to support us, you can send checks to Sweet Home LifePoint, P.O. Box 851, Sweet Home, Oregon 97386. However you can support us, we crave prayer. If you want to support us financially, all is appreciated. We just thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you for being a part of this.